All right, let's start with a bit of a bombshell. What if I told you that one of the most common, most central phrases in modern Christianity, the worship service, is completely 100% absent from the New Testament? Today, we are going to dive deep into the very heart of the early Christian gathering. We're going to peel back centuries of tradition to really understand what the first followers of Jesus actually did when they got together, and what they called it. So, this is the big question that's going to drive our whole discussion. And I know it might sound a little jarring at first, but it's a critical historical fact. The phrase worship service to describe a gathering of believers, it just never appears in the New Testament, not even once. Some scholars have called this the worship anomaly, and today we're going to figure out exactly why that is. Now, just think about that biblical absence for a second, and then look at our language today. It is absolutely saturated with the word worship. We've got worship services, we have worship leaders, worship music, a house of worship, even an order of worship. Theologian John MacArthur Jr. points out that for most people, the whole purpose of the assembly is to worship God. So how did we get here? Where did this huge disconnect between our modern vocabulary and the original text come from? To answer that, we have to get our heads around a really key historical concept, the danger of anachronism. It's basically the mistake of taking our modern ideas and just plastering them onto the past. As the Catholic theologian John O'Malley puts it, this leads to many misunderstandings. And when we're trying to study the early church, this is a trap we absolutely have to avoid. Now, there's a specific kind of an anachronism called semantic anachronism. The scholar D.A. Carson talks about this in his work Exegetical Fallacies. He defines it as taking a modern meaning and applying it to an ancient word. And when we do this, we can totally miss what the original author was trying to say. Our goal here is to get back to that original meaning by looking at these words in their proper first-century context. Let's use the word saint as an example. It makes this super clear. Today, when you hear saint, you probably think of a special, super holy, elite class of Christians, right? But back in the New Testament, saint just meant any believer. Any and all of them. See? If you read our modern definition back into the text, it completely changes the meaning. This is the exact same error we tend to make when we apply our modern concept of worship to the Bible. So let's go straight to the source material. We're going to roll up our sleeves and look at the original Greek words that get translated as worship in our English Bibles. We're going to see what they really meant to a first-century audience. And trust me, this is where things get really interesting. Okay, the first key term is proskuneo. Now, if you break it down, it literally means to move towards something, pros, and to kiss, kuneo. Over time, it came to mean the physical act of bowing down, of prostrating yourself before someone important. It describes a posture of homage. You'll often see it paired with words like to fall down. But here's the crucial part. It describes a physical action, an act of respect. It is never, ever used in the New Testament to describe the regular weekly meeting of believers. The second word we need to look at is latreo. This one is deeply connected to cultic, priestly service. In the Greek version of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, it's almost always about serving God with sacrifices in the temple. It describes the specific jobs of the priesthood. And just like proskuneo, this term is never used in the New Testament to talk about what happened in a regular Christian gathering. The early Christians seem to have deliberately avoided this temple-focused language. The scholar Franklin W. Young just sums this up so perfectly. He wrote, and I quote, "The Christians had no place of worship. More than that, they had nothing to do that could be called worship in the cultic sense. This wasn't some kind of accident. This was a deliberate theological decision. The early church was saying, we are something fundamentally different from the temple-based religions all around us, both Jewish and pagan." So, of course, this leads us to the most important question of all. If the whole point of getting together wasn't what we now call worship, then what was it for? Well, the New Testament isn't quiet about this. Actually, it's remarkably clear and specific about the primary goal of the assembly. And right here in 1 Corinthians 14, we find probably the clearest instruction from an apostle about the purpose of the gathering. The Apostle Paul describes this really participatory meeting, and then he gives this one simple, overarching command to guide everything. Let all things be done for edification. That phrase right there, that is the key that unlocks this whole puzzle. The Greek word Paul uses here is oikodome, and it's actually a construction term. It literally means the act of building a house. So metaphorically, it means to build up, to strengthen, to encourage. And here's the crucial takeaway. The stated primary purpose of the assembly wasn't a vertical act of offering worship up to God, but a horizontal act of building up one another. And the New Testament actually gives us a really clear picture of what this building up looked like. It involved specific relational actions. We see words used over and over again in the context of these meetings like parakaleia, which means to encourage or to exhort, sterizo, which is to strengthen or make firm, and didasko, to teach. And all of these things happen through mutual participation, with each person contributing for the good of the whole group. So what we've really uncovered here is a fundamental shift in focus. All the evidence points away from our modern idea of a worship service and points directly toward an ancient understanding of an edification assembly. And this isn't just a small change in vocabulary, it is a complete reorientation of purpose. Let's just put these two models side by side so we can see the difference. A modern worship focus is primarily vertical. It's directed up toward God. The action is often about offering something or performance. But an edification focus, the one we see in the New Testament, is horizontal. It's directed toward other believers. The goal isn't performance, it's participation and interaction, with the ultimate goal of building up the community. Now, this isn't just some dusty historical exercise. Getting this distinction right has huge practical implications for Christian communities today. It really challenges all of us to ask if our modern gatherings actually line up with the purpose and the pattern laid out by the apostles. So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, when edification becomes the main goal, the whole dynamic of a meeting can change. Leadership might shift from being a performance to being more about facilitation. A one-way monologue could become a more interactive dialogue. Even the architecture can be affected. Are we building a theater for an audience or a living room for a family? The whole focus moves from performance to participation. And this really isn't just about playing games with words. As the scholar I. Howard Marshall points out, this distinction leads to a serious shift in practice from what ought to be happening when we gather together. The words we choose to use really do shape our reality and our actions. So we're left with this final, and I think pretty provocative question. What would happen if this apostolic principle of oikodome, of mutual edification, was truly recovered and placed right back at the center of our gatherings? How might our communities and our own spiritual lives be transformed if our main goal every single time we met was simply to build each other up?